Do you want to learn the tricks that top leaders use to get the most out of themselves and their teams? Well, Naftali Hoff is here to help. Lead to Succeed picks the brains of top leaders to learn about their challenges, insights, and best practices. Here's Naftali.
Hello, Lead to Succeed Nation. It's Naftali Hoff, and welcome to Lead to Succeed, episode 158. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Matt Shenker. As a licensed professional counselor, meditation teacher, and behavior scientist since 2016, Matt has trained thousands of therapists, educators, and managers on how to harness the greatest learnings for behavior science from the last century. Matt is the creator of Empowered Wellbeing Theory, a transdisciplinary psychosocial spiritual model for understanding human well-being. As a framework, that work serves as a foundation for the work Matt does as Chief Solutions Architect, COO, and co-founder at Mattermore. At Mattermore, they're working to empower the future of work, what they call Work 4.0. Matt, great to have you on the show today.
Naftali, thanks so much for having me.
Man, there was a lot of multisyllabic words in there. A couple of things I had to like. I'm usually pretty good. But overall, we got through it. But now you're gonna have to translate that for the plebeians amongst us. So, Matt, why don't you just take us out of the bio and into your story? Give us some context of who you are and how you got here.
Sure. So really, really simple. I am a problem child who grew up with ADHD, held the record at the elementary school I went to for most suspensions ever given to an elementary school student, who grew up really feeling disconnected, lonely, and ashamed through most of my life, who then became an addict. And that struggled and led me down a path of trying to figure out how in the world humans are wired. And then that journey led me on my own self-discovery and self-healing. That journey also then led me to discovering a whole hell of a lot about behavior science. And then I became a therapist. I started working in schools. And while I was working in schools and training other therapists with all of this behavior science I had learned traveling all around the world, getting multiple different degrees, all my best friends were calling me, and they were managers at different companies. And they would call me and ask me questions about how to handle things with their employees. And finally, I was like, why are you calling me? What kind of training did you get? And they were like, what do you mean training? So then I started talking and more to them. I asked them to introduce me to their bosses. And now for the past decade, I've really been going into organizations and helping them set up infrastructure that is rooted in trying to shape systems that harness the best of what we've learned in behavior science in the last few decades and implement it into how we learn and develop skills within the workplace and support people's both well-being and performance at work to create productivity and to make the world a better place.
Wow, what a story. It's kind of interesting because when you were talking about setting records about delinquencies and other related issues. I was thinking about my own childhood, although I think for different reasons, just based on the nature of my upbringing and some of the challenges I encountered. But it's funny because literally just this morning, I was listening to a recent talk that I gave, clips of it that somebody cut up for me. And one of them I talked about in the context of empowering others. That was really the focus of that particular talk. But because I'm an educator by trade, because I'm a former school leader, so I often interact with teachers as well as with business professionals. And I was telling this business audience of leaders and managers what I often tell teachers, which is that the paradigm that we have in when we approach our students and the structure of the classroom is oftentimes either the outgrowth of having a great model, a teacher that we really connected with and really was that person that we want to be exactly like, or we're on the exact opposite end of the spectrum. We had terrible experiences and we want to bring a fresh perspective and a new way of doing things to the classroom. And that's often what inspires people to go into education in the first place. And I was kind of thinking about you and your story and the challenges without knowing the specifics, but the challenges that you encountered that ultimately motivated you to then become part of the solution. That's often, I think, where people find their purpose, where people find their direction. And I just wanted to emphasize that here because I think that oftentimes as we're thinking about purpose, we're thinking about who we are. With my mastermind group, we're currently doing Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, and we're in habit number 2.
Beautiful.
Begin with the end in mind. So it's all about, who do I want to be? Unfortunately, when I die, God forbid, but when that day comes, how do I want to be remembered? How do I want people to say I lived my life, and live with that intentionality? And oftentimes, even in leadership, I think people don't necessarily think in those terms, but ought to. So I'm curious to know, kind of staying there for a moment, Matt, what is your perspective on what I've been sharing, and what is your own, let's call it, unique take in helping leaders to not only create systems that work, but to do so with intention, to do so with a longer term lens rather than what's in front of me here and now?
Yeah, one of the things that I highlight when I work with leaders is to start with what is a leader's strength, which is anyone that's in a leadership position got there because they have some level of strength around how they strategize, how they evaluate information, how they make decisions. Somebody somewhere saw the way that they make decisions and decided, you know what, I should have you have other people that follow you, or I should follow you. And so there's already a strength there. The challenge in our modern day is that so few people have spaces and supports that help them turn that same skill set inward to define what actually matters to them. So I've worked with thousands of people that make it through their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s and say, I've built the big, bright, shiny life, but it feels hollow on the inside. That I've sort of been playing this game by the rules, but I'm not really fulfilled. And that's because fulfillment isn't something that someone else can hand us. We have to have a compass that's defined by what actually matters to us. And in this modern world, with the way that technology has shifted and the way that our society has shifted in the last 3 decades, we just have less spaces for helping people actually define meaning and purpose in their life. And you highlighted it really beautifully. The phrase I often use is that the roots of our values are in the moments in our life that brought us a heartburst or heartbreak. And so when I used to work with folks as a therapist, one of the very first things we would cover in the first session was, let's fast forward to your deathbed or even to your funeral. And when you're gone or when you're dying and you think about the way that you want people to describe the way that you lived, what does that sound like? What really matters to you about how you live your life? And then as you explore that question, what you will inevitably will think about are, how have I impacted people? What are the skills I've used that have impacted people? What are the moments in my life where I was most alive? And what was most present there? What values were most present there? Was it creativity? Was it family? Was it fame? What sort of things were present when you were most alive? And then there's the flip side, which is when you felt most hollow, empty, broken, or lost, what things were most missing? And by exploring just those 2 questions, you can get really, really clear about what matters most to you. And then one of the keys in a business is, if you have more than like 1 or 3 values, you really don't have any, because values are supposed to then help you make decisions and to prioritize things. So you really need to get really clear on, what do you want to stand for, whether it's around how you shape a process within your team, how you shape a culture within your organization, or how you want to shape the operating system of your life. And by defining those things, now it can really shift the way that you evaluate how you're going to spend your time, and you can optimize it for either creating value within a team or creating fulfillment within your life. But to your point, that has to happen intentionally. And you can't excavate those insights about what really matters without really reflecting on what has happened. And in your personal life, that means auditing, what have you experienced and what has that felt like in your life? And in a business, it's about evaluating what has worked and what was happening there, and what drove the people that were doing those things. And so one of the things that I coach leaders up on, and that our product helps leaders with, is understanding part of your responsibility as a leader is to be the champion steward of purpose. That means the mission and vision of what your business is doing or what your team is doing, but also connecting the values of the people that are collaborating with you to drive that mission toward that vision. And if you're able to do that, if you're able to use your interactions with the people that work with you and for you to understand more of what drives them, now you can connect their internal motivations to the direction that you're trying to go. And now instead of doing things in order to avoid criticism from you or to earn gold star praise from you, now you can be a support for them becoming more of who they are, which is the greatest motivational force any person has. And that gets to be this great hack of how we can use keys of psychology to actually massively supercharge both performance and well-being of people on our team, just by understanding that one foundation of leadership, which is being that steward of purpose.
Wow. Okay. Well, here's the problem I have. Every time you kept talking, I had a new thing I wanted to ask you, and then you layered on something else. So let's actually state in the end of what you were describing for now, the freshest piece of it, this champion of steward of purpose, as you call it. Let's translate that for the simple folk in like myself. What does that look like? And what would that practically look like? Because I think people love concepts, but sometimes we get lost in platitudes or lost in these conceptual ideas of impact and integrity and leadership and all of that. And it sounds great, but
Yeah.
I'm in the weeds on a daily basis with my people. I know I could be doing better, but I don't know how. So obviously every situation is unique, but in terms of some overall specific actions, or perhaps a scenario that you could kind of like walk us through, what would be something where someone can say, yeah, I can relate to that. I can hear where the problem was, hear the specific actions that were taken. Here's the outcome on the other side. That's a little bit rosier than where we started.
Sure. So I'll walk us with a framework and then I'll get us really, really niche and specific. So the framework I'd offer is, as leaders, we really have three buckets of responsibilities. And that would be one of the places where, being a steward of purpose is deployed, is within each of those three spaces. And so one is empowering yourself, the other is empowering others, and then the third is building empowering systems. And so from a system standpoint, your responsibility is to be able to evaluate what is happening and what should be happening, right? As a leader, you're always evaluating what's happening within my business or my team and what should be happening. And so one exercise that I'll have folks do is something I call the alignment matrix. And it's really simple. You list for yourself, whether it's a particular team or a particular scenario, something that's happened. Think about, what things do you want to continue happening? What things do you want to have happening? What things do you want to stop happening? And now those are actions that can go in either the top right box for continue and start, and then in the top left box for stop. And now you can get into a question, right? If you're in a one-on-one with somebody, or you're talking with a team, or you're reflecting for yourself, well, now ask yourself, the behaviors that you want to stop happening, whether they are behaviors that happen in a system like a supply chain, or they are behaviors as far as just a particular employee doing something, what's driving that behavior? And that goes in the bottom left box. What are the things that drive the stuff that you want to stop happening? Because now you need to create a new function for whatever is at the root of that. And then you have the continue and start box, which is, what value would that generate for your business or for yourself or for that person? And that goes in the bottom right box, so that people can start to understand we're creating actions in order to serve certain value. And now you can get into very specific scenarios where then you can drill into there, and you can say, oh, now we can start to understand what's at the root of these behaviors. And now we can kind of become designers of shifting systems.
Yeah, I really like that for a few reasons. First of all, the visual piece, people learn in different ways. And if you can compartmentalize elements of it and put it in its appropriate place, you can get a better feel for the interconnectivity and where to go with it. Because that's also I find very paralyzing for people. I know I've got a problem, but I don't know what to do with it, and they feel stuck. And then just in general, I think that when people know that their role as a leader, you weren't, I don't think, focusing on this first and foremost, but it sort of grew out of what you were saying. Leaders have a very specific role. You may have other roles also, but your primary role as a leader is to provide vision, as well as to be able to assess where things are, and not just to take things, further just because we've been doing it this way in the past. So to be continually evaluating and assessing, which is, I think, very, very powerful. Now, I'm just curious, Matt, based on behavior science in particular, what would you say if you were just giving a lecture? Let's call it, I don't want to put a number to it because I don't want to box you in, but let's just say the top learnings of behavior science to help companies in the 21st century or help leaders in the 21st century. What would you say are the top couple of things that we know about the way we think, about the way we operate as human beings, that if everybody knew them and if everybody applied them, would make the workplace or any type of organizational life that much more effective, efficient, enjoyable, purposeful, etc.?
Yeah, it's simple to talk about and hard to do. But the simple piece, when you really look at all the behavior science from the last few decades that we've unlocked, and then you look at what we know compared to what we're actually implementing in terms of how we live our lives and shape our systems, how we approach leadership, how we approach learning and development, how we approach supporting collaboration, management. It's one simple thing that would transform any business and transform anything within any of those spaces, which is understanding that as human beings, our deepest drive is to seek connection and belonging. And the most powerful process for unlocking sustained high performance is understanding how to create trust with people and within people, period.
Okay. Well, that piece alone, I'd like to unpack a little bit,
Please.
because when we talk about trust, so I typically think of the Ken Blanchard model, the ABCD model of trust. You might be
Sure.
familiar: able, believable, connected, dependable. There are other
Yep.
models as well. What are your key ingredients for developing trust? Trust is a funny thing. It's
Yeah.
like people often will say, well, I know it when I see it, right? I can feel it,
Yeah.
but I can't necessarily define it or break it up into its components. How do you define it? And what do you look for? Like, how would you assess whether there's a healthy amount of trust, for example, between a leader and their direct reports in a particular environment where you're consulting?
Yeah. So there's two core ways I can evaluate very quickly. One is I can talk to a few people, right? But that's a bit more time intensive. But typically, by talking to a few people, they'll tell you based on how they talk about that relationship without even having to use the word trust or distrust. And then what you're looking for based on how they're talking to you are the same things that you can actually evaluate by evaluating certain aspects of data or evaluating certain patterns of communicating without interviewing people. And the question is, how much important information is not being communicated in a timely manner? Because ultimately, for a business, it's all about flow of information and communication. So the key with trust is by actually creating trust, you get access to the information you need as a leader. Because when people encounter challenges or they have questions, they know where to go and they aren't scared of asking them. When people need to take risks where they might make mistakes, but it actually could have huge payoffs, and the mistakes are actually ones that have pretty high ceilings, but you want people to make those risks. They won't do that if there's not a certain level of trust there. And so in order to have a highly creative space that has information flowing, you need that trust, which also means all you really have to look for is how creative are people being here and how much information that should be shared is not shared.
Mm-hmm.
And then the
So
way that I
stay on,
define
yeah, go ahead.
trust is I define trust as how much do people believe that they are cared about and are important here in this space, whether it's a relationship or an organization? And how they would rate that on a scale of 0 to 100 is how much they trust either that organization or they trust a leader. And so you've seen trust in institutions over the last few decades have plummeted. And at the core of that is people in today's society are walking around just feeling like the institutions around them don't care about them. And so when you talk to about a leader, it's really simple. Do I feel like what matters to me is important to this person?
Hmm. It's kind of interesting because the way you're defining it, if I'm understanding you correctly, of those four categories that I ran through earlier, connected seems to be the one that rises to the top, in terms
Yeah.
of the communication, in terms of the feeling of care. So let's actually talk about something that I dealt with recently. I started a networking group within my own community, And so I wanted to communicate frequently to the point where people really understood where we were going with it, what we're doing, what the meetings are going to look like, etc. And I was at the point, perhaps even exceeded the point of what we might call over communicating. And I'm
Sure.
just curious to know, obviously every situation is different. Is there a particular level at which you advise people to say, this is a healthy amount of communication, this is a good frequency, this is not enough, and this is too much?
Yeah, I tend to find that it's case by case. That what I really try to help organizations do is build processes and systems for consistently evaluating what needs to be communicated when and where. That's really unique, right? And it's unique in every relationship. Like my girlfriend and I, we do a relationship check-in once a week because we both love that and we love the structure with that. But I have friends that are in relationships and they sort of have one of those, check-in conversations once a month because otherwise it just felt like too much for them. And so it's really about what are the needs of the people in the relationship and what is the purpose of the relationship need. And so for a business, it's okay, you might have certain things that just really need to be communicated on a minute by minute or a daily basis. And so figuring out what's the best way to do that. Is it a meeting in the morning or is it something asynchronous where those sort of things can be communicated either through Slack or an email or they exist in some platform that people can access? But really, it's about figuring out both the needs of your business, the needs that you have in your role as a leader or manager, and then the needs of the other people that you work with and who work for you. What's the sweet spot? And it's the challenge is it's constantly dynamic. The problem is we fall into the trap of short-term efficiency, which undermines long-term effectiveness. And so, particularly nowadays, so many leaders see all of the tasks that they have on their to-do list. And so we can fall into the psychological trap of thinking, well, if I can just communicate more sooner, then that's less that I'll have to do later, as opposed to really optimizing for people's stress regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So if I start to overwhelm you with information, I'm no longer increasing trust because now I've communicated to you through my actions that I don't actually care about what you need in order to process information I have to share. Instead, I've
Right.
communicated to you that what I optimize for is my own efficiency at the detriment of your comprehension. And
Yeah.
so it's really like buying into the sort of systems model of thinking that the key is efficiency of communication to communicate what is necessary and to do the work of identifying what's really necessary for people to know now and what could be communicated later, what could be communicated beforehand. So in the stance of a meeting, it's really evaluating, well, what could be communicated beforehand? And if it's setting
Yeah.
up a new initiative or program, it might be tagging a few people that you know will be participants and asking them if they could give their input and saying, hey, I want to give you the outline of how I'm planning to communicate some of these things. These things I'm planning on putting in our group chat or in this social media group or on email. And these sort of things I'm going to cover in the first, 5 to 10 minutes of our first call together. And then these things will be accessible always, either, on Google Drive or on some platform. How would that feel to you? What questions would come up for you? And the challenge with that is there's an upfront investment with that. Now we're creating more work for ourselves. But the invitation there is to actually let go of the illusion that it's more effective to just shove it all into one communication touch point. Because if people don't comprehend it, then you're actually going to spend more time, double, triple, quadruple amounts of time trying to solve problems that come up because of people's lack of comprehension from that one touch point. And so
Yeah.
it's making things more of a system and a process and investing more time in the front end of really thinking about and pulling in other collaborators to figure out what needs to be communicated when and how so that then it goes more smoothly so there are less problems in the middle and back end.
Yeah. A few things to unpack, although we're running out of time in this segment. There's been so much, and I still have questions for you. But
Sure.
one thing are the different modalities, different approaches to communication. We often have. I know I have these conversations a lot, whether on podcasts or other places. We have biases, we have certain preferences, things that work for us. And so we often associate those preferences with other people, and we assume that if it works for me, it must work for you. And we have to take a step back and ask that question. This is often how I do it. Would it work for you? Let's talk about frequency, but let's also talk about medium. Let's talk about the form of delivery and those kinds of things. One other question I wanted to ask you, and this relates to something you talked about before and a little bit of what I read in the bio as well. You referenced multiple times way back when about us having less space today. And in general, you're very much involved in the, let's call it the mental and even mentioned spiritual well-being. Do you feel like we're sort of trending in the wrong direction here? What are some of the particular challenges in these areas? And how can people recapture the right, let's call it balance, focus, emphasis, so that they are not living that hollow or empty feeling that we talked about earlier, but they feel like they're really feeding all aspects of themselves without sacrificing some of the aspirations that they have in the workplace, et cetera?
Yeah, 100%. So it's beyond a feeling. I have a deep conviction that we are in a desperate time of transition and an urgent crisis when it comes to mental health, stress, and loneliness and disorder in this country. And so the data is all you have to look at to see that story play out. In 2016, the US Surgeon General left office and he said he was going to commit his life to fighting the greatest health challenge facing our country. He wasn't talking about an opioid epidemic or a virus. He was talking about the crisis of loneliness. So since technology has surged in the last few decades, in the last few centuries since the Industrial Revolution, our technological innovations aren't just getting faster, they're getting exponentially faster. And as technology has innovated so rapidly, we have struggled to socioculturally adapt in order to keep up. And so what that creates is a feeling of overwhelm. And you can see that from the 80s and 90s as the television and internet started to surge. And then the 24-hour news cycle was really born during the O.J. Simpson trial, and then had gasoline poured on it with 9/11, where now urgently we adopted this new behavior of this continuous partial attention, always consuming news and information. And then the smartphone and social media then came in and rode the wave of that new habit. And now the structure we used to have that separated when I'm working and when I'm not working was eroded. The structure that we used to have of when I consume news and when I don't consume news eroded. And so now we sort of feel bombarded by information and content while also having less access to in-person experiences with other adults who aren't anxious and stressed, because our stress levels have been going up as a collective since 2001. And so what that creates is more stress people are walking around with, more stress while having less space to actually process what they're experiencing, which is why depression is now the leading cause of disability worldwide and has been for a decade, which is why although our GDP and our technology are innovating at a ridiculous rate going up and to the right, so too are deaths of despair, meaning from overdose, cirrhosis of the liver, or suicide. So too are mass shootings. So too are rates of anxiety for millennials and Gen Z. Those numbers are all going up because we're struggling to figure out how do we build systems that empower people to build both the skills they need and to build the resources they need to live a fulfilling life where they can have healthy stress regulation through their day-to-day. And so it's a crisis that unfortunately has made its way into work, because for the modern human, the number one place where they interact with other humans is not in their partnership or with their family or with their friends, it is at work. And so being managers or leaders whose responsibility it is to structure ways people can collaborate to produce value for whatever it is your business does requires that you have to meet some of the needs of the people that work there. And their list of needs have been growing. And so it's a crisis facing our entire society, but it's a crisis that every leader now has to take some sort of responsibility for, because everyone's walking around with greater challenges, disorders, needs, stress.
Wow. Oh, I would love to unpack that more. There's so much in there, but I am looking at the clock and I want to make sure that we are able to get to some other segments as well. The last
Awesome.
question of this segment, which is a question I ask all of my guests, is what is the biggest mistake that you have made in your past somewhere that has ultimately positioned you for greater success?
For me, it was falling into the traps of addiction. When I was 19 years old, I found myself standing on top of a bridge on an overpass looking at a highway. I'd climbed over a fence. I was holding an empty handle of vodka. I had half an 8 ball in my pocket and 3 oxys flowing through my system. And I could feel the wind of the cars underneath me, and I was debating on jumping. And within me, there was a whisper amidst all the shouting that was telling me that I had nothing to live for, that I really didn't serve any purpose. I didn't deserve to live. There was a whisper that said, "Who are you?" And I didn't really have an answer to that question. And so I figured, wait a second. If I don't know who I am, I probably shouldn't eliminate this person from the planet. And then I climbed back over the fence. I walked back home. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I decided then at 19 years old, I was going to stop using all drugs, and I was going to spend some time trying to figure out who I was and what that could mean. And that journey is then what led me on this path of learning everything I possibly could about philosophy, psychology, education. I would literally show up on the doorstep of different mental health providers, different New York Times bestselling authors whose books I was inhaling, and I was desperate, asking for help. But that desperation is what unlocked this sense of purpose for me. Instead of comfort being my number one goal, which it became after getting thrown into the throes of addiction, and before that, my number one goal was just to seem cool to people. Now, suddenly, my top value shifted. It became knowledge. And then that quest for knowledge gave me this entire new skill set and infrastructure for looking at the world, and this new skill set for learning information that now is the bedrock for everything good that has come thereafter in my life.
Wow. One thing I love, and I got to keep it short. I'd love to unpack it more. But one thing that I liked in particular was the fact that you asked the questions and you took action. You reading a book and you took action in terms of getting a mentor or following up in some way. Oftentimes, even when we take steps in the right direction, we, don't maximize. We don't maximize that awareness, that transition, that opportunity. So it's good to hear that. And it's a good reminder for all of us that, they often say knowledge is half the battle or something similar. It's true to a degree, but it's really the action behind the knowledge. I can know everything in the world, but if I'm not intentional in doing something with it, it really doesn't serve me. So thank you for that reminder, Matt. Let's now let's have a little bit of fun with this one. Not everything is fun, but a more rapid fire style. What's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning?
I get out of bed and I put 2 feet on the ground and I stretch.
Nice. Okay. My back could definitely use more of that. Meditation or exercise if you had to pick one?
Exercise.
Your go-to stress relief activity?
Singing.
What was it?
Singing. I used to be a lead singer in a band. That's right.
Oh, nice. The best book you've read recently?
Best book that I've read recently. I reread The Alchemist every year, and it is by far my favorite book. And so I think I just reread that again this year, 2 weeks ago, and I'm reminded once again why it's my favorite.
That constitutes recently to me. Something about you that might surprise people.
In college, I competed in freestyle rap competitions and won dozens of them.
Wow. Okay, we'll have to have you wrap the rest of your responses now. Okay, the one app, I know this is loaded considering your answer before. The one app that you can't live without.
Oh, my notes app. I have thousands upon thousands of notes in there, and I'm in that notes app dozens of times a day.
If you had an extra hour in your day, how would you spend it?
Extra hour of my day. I'd probably spend it writing.
Okay. Your hidden talent other than rap.
My hidden talent is the same, I think, as my greatest talent, which is really storytelling.
And then finally, a productivity tip that helps you to get more done.
Productivity tip that helps me to get more done. I break up my workouts into 4 different workouts throughout the day instead of one big one, so I can maximize the boost that I get post workout to give me more productive minutes in the day.
Nice. Okay, so let everyone know, please, how they can connect with you, Matt, learn more about your work, and hopefully benefit from all of this that you have learned and accumulated over the years.
Absolutely. If you're curious about the AI product that we're building and the company that stands behind it, you can go to Mattermore, MATTERMORE.ai. If you want to know more about me or connect with me, you can go to LinkedIn and it's Matt Shenker, Shenker. You can also follow along on Instagram, which is at Shenker Things, SHENKERTHINGS. There's all kinds of content out there, and I'm on those at a daily basis and try to reply to every message anyone sends me within 24 hours. So happy to connect.
Awesome. Leave us, please, Matt, with one final life lesson to wrap up the episode.
Greatest life lesson, I think, that has had the deepest ripple effects for me in my life was a quote from a movie adaptation. And the quote was, "You are defined by what you love, not what loves you."
Okay. Very powerful, succinct, and a lot to think about. Well, Matt, it has been a pleasure. And I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. I've learned a lot, and I thank you for being with me on Lead to Succeed. And as we are approaching the evening on a Friday, I'm going to wish you a Shabbat Shalom, as well as much continued success in everything that you do. And I can't wait to share this content with my listeners. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Thanks again for having me, and everybody, thanks for listening. And Naftali, Shabbat Shalom to you as well, and have a great weekend.
You too. All the best now.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode and for investing in yourself so that you can lead to succeed. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your feedback gives the show more social proof and encourages more folks to listen.